Look, it's all well and good to be excited for England, but is it too much to ask that Bukayo, Saka, and Declan Rice maybe just come home and get some rest? This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith, the Black Man on Twitter. Gunner, yeah, this is where rooting for England, as I am, clashes with my Arsenal interest, which is that, like, at some point you start to do the math on when this final is going to be, and you start to do the math on when Saka and Rice are going to be done and how much they've played in this tournament and how much they're going to be playing this season. And the equation doesn't look super fantastic. I'm no math expert, but as you might say, maths expert, but I don't think it looks great. So that having been said, I am super happy for England. Congratulations to all the England fans listening. And, obviously to our Dutch listeners, very sorry. I still think a good tournament for you. To the French listeners, apologies, but it is going to be England-Spain. I think it does have the makings of a mouth-watering final, and it'll be the first game of the entire tournament where I think it's fair to say England won't be the favorite. And so that'll be interesting, right? There's been a lot of expectation of them winning every game they've been in because they've been favored over their opposition, and now they're going to face an opponent who will likely be favorites over them. And I don't know, maybe that creates some freedom. We'll talk a bit about that. We'll talk about Saka and Rice. We're going to talk Califiori because he's inching closer. I mean, at some point, he is going to be touching Arsenal, hopefully lovingly, because he is a handsome man, let's be honest. I do want to let you know that we did a Califiori scouting video, Clive and I, over on Patreon. And I go into a lot of scouting videos where my goal is to not to find flaws. That's not the right way to say it, but to try to have a skeptical eye and not just use it like a YouTube comp and be blown away by every player. It was hard not to be impressed by Califiori. I will say it that way. If you want to go watch, this is a player to be excited about. I would say be excited. Tim has done 2 history pods, one that went out yesterday about the formation of the club, and part 2 of that goes out tomorrow. It's all scheduled to be released tomorrow. So lots of good stuff over on Patreon if you want to stay up to date with the Arsenal stuff, especially now as the Euros and Copa content is receding. And of course, we will talk about Fight Night in Charlotte as part of this pod. So a lot to get to. Here with me now is Paul. You can find him on Twitter at Pause My Pants. Hello, Pause. And Tim, you can find him on Twitter at Stillman. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Hello there indeed. All right, let's talk England. I might as well. And Tim, might as well turn it over to you. I mean, I am super, super excited for Saka and Rice. Obviously, I was devastated that Saka's goal was ruled out for offside because I would have enjoyed that more. But I did enjoy that, like, within moments of a mobile striker getting on the pitch, a striker scored a goal from a striker position as opposed to wherever Kane was in his armchair watching. It was a really, really interesting game. I actually think, ironically, that despite being behind, England played some of their most impressive football in the first half of this game. The second half felt a little bit more Englandy. But let's just start with the joy. I mean, how excited are you for England to be in their second consecutive final in a Euros, in a major tournament? It's huge accomplishment, really exciting for these players. And, what are your overall thoughts heading into it?
Yeah, very exciting. It is a bit strange. Like, someone said something on a podcast I listened to this morning about the Ollie Watkins moment, and just said England fans aren't used to those moments going for them. Like, quite often they're on the other end of them, or have been over the years, and it's really strange as well, because I think there's a lot of kind of retconning going on now, like, because the discourse around the England team's like so emotional, which is fine, but there's like loads of kind of, see, Southgate was doing it right, and it's a bit like, no, England have been crap for the vast majority of this tournament, and I don't think that changes because of this. This was their best performance by a long way, particularly that first half, from a low bar. But I think what's really interesting about England in this tournament is they've gone behind in every knockout game, which is not really what you associate with a Southgate team. And to me, kind of says he's been freestyling it a bit. Like, I think England in the past have been a bit Deschamps France. They have been a bit cautious and all of that. I don't think they've been cautious in this tournament. That's not what I'd accuse them of. I'd say they've been bad for most of it, but it does kind of feel like it does feel like England have grown into the tournament, and a lot of that is because they didn't really know what they were doing coming into it. So they came into it at a low point, but They've built on some partnerships, they've tweaked some things a little bit, and it's gotten better. It has to be said. So, but what I think one of the things I've always thought as well around like tournament football in particular, I hate using this comparison, but when Chelsea won the Champions League in 2012, there were 2 years before that where they should have won it and didn't. Like 2009, hilariously, as it turned out, they got screwed over by some bad decisions against peak Barcelona, and Chelsea should have won that. They should have won the Champions League that year. But actually, they won it in their worst year when they were probably at their weakest. And I think in tournament football, if you keep hanging around, eventually you'll get there. And it might not be your vintage year. I think England played better in the last Euros. They probably played better in World Cup 2018, albeit they played some quite poor teams there. Like, how do you pass Panama as an opponent? And also expectations were lower, whereas they're quite high now. I don't think it's incorrect that they're high. They've got England have some really, really good world-class players. I think expectations kind of should be high. So England have gone through another tournament basically just about beating teams you'd expect them to beat. They haven't beaten anyone resoundingly. So like England haven't been good, but they've done enough. They've been a bit lucky. They were lucky to top their group on 5 points. They were lucky that one side of the draw was so loaded. And, you had Germany and Spain kind of playing each other and all of that. But then England were unlucky in the last World Cup because they won their group and they bumped into France in the quarterfinal. So again, if you keep doing this, if you keep getting to the latter stages, 1 year it will drop for you. And I have to say I've got a good feeling about Sunday. I've just got... It's totally vibes based. I've just got this feeling. It's a completely vibes based feeling. It's just like England have been to this kind of stage before playing better, and it feels like the year they are a bit stinky might be the year they do it.
Yeah. Look, tournament football is about a number of things, one of which is getting a good draw. Because eventually, if you keep coming up against the giants, you might lose a close game against another excellent team and not wind up where you might have had you had a different draw. The Champions League certainly proved that this season, right? There was one side of the draw that was much friendlier than the other. Do we think Manchester City makes the final if they're on the other side of the draw? I think so. Do we? I think there's a decent chance at that too. But we had Real Madrid, Bayern, and City on our side of the draw. As we found out, that proved difficult. I think the best analog here is Manchester United. Manchester United were the width of a hair on my head from losing the most humiliating FA Cup semifinal in the history of the FA Cup, throwing away a 3-goal lead to lose 4-3 to Coventry City, the 9th place team in the championship. That's how close Ten Hag came to delivering the most humiliating FA Cup defeat in history. But instead, United won the FA Cup. Now, that seemed to be enough to keep Ten Hag in the job at United. Does anyone think Ten Hag's a good coach because that hair went his direction in the semifinal and he got one good performance out of his team in a final? I don't think so. But this is the point. I don't have to think Southgate is any good at this because I don't know that it matters. Can I tell you something people aren't going to agree with? I don't think Didier Deschamps is a good manager. I don't think there's many good managers in the international game, period. But they play together so infrequently. They train together so infrequently that I do think, not every time, but in large part, the most talented teams win these tournaments because it's so uncoordinated, so discombobulated, so little preparation time to play together that it's, you know what tournaments are about? International tournaments? Really talented individuals doing big things. It's about Jude Bellingham scoring from a bicycle kick to turn what would have been a humiliating exit into a triumph. It's about Bukayo Saka hitting the inside of the post instead of the outside of the post and scoring a goal that keeps him in the tournament. It's about having a 32 goal and assist striker that you can bring off the bench to score a winner. That's what this is about. And ultimately, I think England were a favorite in this tournament, not because of Southgate, but because they have, in my view, the most talented team in world football right now, or at least one of the 2 or 3 most talented. And so I think this is wonderful for England because they're doing exactly what you should do when you have more talent. Your extremely talented players should find moments of genius and win the game for you. So I don't think anyone in England is going to put an asterisk by this and say we had an easier draw. We played ugly. If they win the Euros, then they deserve all the plaudits. That's how tournament football works. So I'm super happy for them. And Paul, I want to kind of steer this more towards an Arsenal lens, which is get pop psychology on me here for a minute. Let's say England do go on to do it. And I don't know that will happen, but let's say, are you able to kind of extract from that any potential benefit for a Saka or a Rice? If they go on to be heroes of a Euro winning England, after so long without a major international tournament trophy. And I mean, it is interesting because the official UEFA account did their graphic for the upcoming game on Sunday. 2 Spain players on one side, 2 England players on the other side, and the 2 England players are Saka and Rice, which I thought was interesting. What do you make of what this could mean, if anything, for Saka and Rice specifically?
Yeah, for sure. I think when you see Rodri on the pitch on the other side in the final, if our boys get the better of their boys with Rodri on the pitch, again, it's another piece that Saka and Rice think they're in this business for the big prizes, that they can overturn the old guard, the established, the top dog, the favorite. And so I do think they can come out of this tournament with a meaningful victory that positions Arsenal going forward for its role, which is to overturn the established order, the status quo, the team that's won the last 19 Premier Leagues and can't be defeated. Well, you can't be defeated until you are defeated. But to do that, you need players who think it can be done. And getting one over on a Rodri-driven Spain will give these guys a psychological boost going into the next season that I think can be significant. I mean, I think they have that belief. I think they're onto something, but there's nothing quite to fuel it like winning the Euros, thinking your career is on a path and a trajectory. That's why Rice chose Arsenal. To become the center of the thing that overturns the established order. He could have gone to City. He could have been Rodri's sidekick and kind of shared duties, etc. But he plumped for Arsenal. And if they can do it, if they can win this major tournament, come back in the summer, they'll be hungry for more, believing like there's a movie script being written about them and there's the trajectory and it's only a matter of time. Is it this season or next?
Yeah. I thought Saka was fantastic in this game, and I thought Rice, I guess you could say is at fault for the goal. Bit of T-Rex arms from Pickford, but I also think Rice is sort of fouled, though I don't want those fouls given. So like if the Xavi Simons goal was like an Arsenal player scoring and the foul on Rice was being reviewed, I wouldn't want that given as a foul. I'd want the goal to stand. So I got to be honest about that. But like the way Rice came back into the game and just the amount of territory he covers is insane. His engine is incredible. But like,
what struck me on the goal was how much space they leave Rice in to cover on his own.
And I'll tell you something, that is a byproduct of Kobe Minu. Whatever you think of Kobe Minu, and I think he's a talented young player, he's not a space monster. You know what I mean? He doesn't cover a lot of ground. And to be fair, that's the whole point of Declan Rice is you don't need the other guy to cover a lot of ground. But he is largely playing central midfield by himself. I think Minu actually probably looks a little better in the attacking third, almost as like an 8/10. And obviously Jude Bellingham is a 9.5 basically. So it is all Rice back there, Yeah. I did want to say this about Saka. I thought he was brilliant in the first half in particular. And I feel bad for him that Shaw wasn't on in the first half. Because if Shaw had been on the first half, I think Saka would have had like 3 or 4 assists. There were a couple times he carried the ball sort of into the middle, beat a man. And you'd look, and there was just no one on the left side of the pitch at all. It's just a void. There were other times he cut it back into the box, and Kane had beautiful views of it. He should have like built a bay window and put a chair. Could have seen all the beautiful cutbacks from Saka. Nice view of it. If Watkins had been on then, he might have filled his boots. Yeah, go ahead.
My analogy with Kane is that he's like a grand piano that you expect to be pushed into the middle of the concert hall stage, waiting for the guy to come and sit down and play him.
Which he did from the penalty spot, which is his whole MO.
Yeah,
so.
Well, exactly. Like, he's still a worldie with the ball at his feet. But man, he's become less and less mobile. How did he get all those goals for Bayern this season? What are they doing to feed the machine?
It is a warning about the Bundesliga, man. I'm telling you, they mint goals for attackers there.
It's astounding.
Tim, Saka and Rice, thoughts from you?
Yeah, I thought Saka played really well again. Rice, it's really weird, isn't it? Because as soon as he lost that ball, instantly in my head, I was like, please don't go in. This can't go. Oh, God, it's gone in. Because, like, I wrote about this last week. It's, how hard it is to share your players with other people who don't support your club. And the thing is, again, it's like it's so feverish around England that, like, don't get me wrong, that's a Rice mistake. It's not exactly a clanger. Like, it's not, he hasn't booted the ball into his own net. Like, Xavi Simons has picked his pocket. Like, well done. That doesn't happen to Declan Rice very often. We all know that. And then, like, he's just smashed it in the top corner from 25 yards, and it's a bit like, okay, that's like a semi mistake, really. But people are like, oh my God, Rice is rubbish. He's awful. We need to be playing this, because, like, everyone brings their club biases into it, and we all do that. And there's, but some people really, really go a bit extra. So, I was glad that I kind of kept an eye on him, as it were. And because I was so anxious about, everyone's going to get stuck into him and say he's crap, and he's clearly not. And he clearly did absolutely fine after that. But the other thing that kind of happens with England is, like, you get on the Football Cliches pod, they describe this as the clamour. You always get one or two players for whom there's a clamour. There's a kind of, it starts off as a, should he be playing? Should he be playing? And it quickly snowballs into, this guy should always play and every single thing he does is amazing. And when people go into that phase, they often go into and therefore that guy is awful. And we saw it, we're still seeing some of that halo effect with Cole Palmer. Like, don't get me wrong, I think Cole Palmer's a good player. I think he's played a decent part in this tournament. Like, well done. But, like, the credit he's getting for the assist to Ollie Watkins is like, oh my God, Cole Palmer, like, with an Ozil-esque kind of pass. And I don't want to take it away from him. Do you know what I mean? Like, But at the same time, people go over the top because there's the clamour for Cole Palmer, and it's the same with Mainu as well. And because Mainu's in there, and people really wanted to see him, which I completely right. Like, I think he's pretty much solved that issue that, frankly, Southgate gave himself at the beginning of the tournament. But because Mainu's got this halo effect at the moment, and Rice is the guy next to him, it's like, Rice is rubbish. Like, Mainu's doing everything type thing. So it's like, yeah, it's really complicated when you're kind of sharing your players. But when they have that moment, like, because Saka had the moment in the quarterfinal now, like, he's clear now. He's like, no one will say anything anymore. Like, that's enough. That clears the bar, regardless of whether that's right or not. So, like, you get all these kind of interesting dynamics. But look, at the end of the day, they both stayed on for every minute of every game in this knockout. And that tells you everything you need to know.
Just a quick question for you, Tim. I mean, the ruled out Saka goal, I mean, I was bursting with joy and pride for him. And I will admit, I may have screamed some obscenities about Walker being offside where I don't think he needs to be.
No, absolutely. And Trippier did that a couple of times as well. Yeah, I could tell because I was watching with my wife, who's not English and therefore, wants England to win, but obviously isn't emotionally invested. But when that went in, she got up because it was Saka. So it felt like a bigger moment. But to be fair, with the kind of automated offsides, like, I do appreciate how much better it is, that it was given pretty much instantly. Like, I will still always be anti VAR, I think, until the technology exists to make it utterly instant, which I don't think it probably ever will, but that's such an improvement. And it's going to be so hard to go back for the first 6 weeks of next season to what we had before.
Yeah. All right, Paul, before we move on to the next topic, is it coming home?
I think England have a better shot than maybe the neutral might think. I think they're kind of a low-key, sneaky. I kind of feel they'll do it, and then I think I'm actually picturing the game with Spain just totally dominating possession and England just trying to get a foothold in the game. So I think they have a definite chance, but I think Spain, like if I had to put money on it, I'm going to put it on Spain. But I think England still have a really good shot. It doesn't really matter if it's 55-45, 60-40. Anything happens in a game.
So this is what scares me a little about the final, and I want to get your take on this a little bit. I've watched the periods where England have been dominated in possession during this tournament, and everybody drops deep, including Kane. And there is no outlet. Did you guys notice this? Saka was playing sort of as a wing back in the out of possession phase. It was like a 5-3 or a 5-2-3 with Saka covering the right back position or right wing back position defensively. Mainu and Rice in front of a line of 5, and then Foden, Kane, and Jude up front, sort of pressing on the ball and things like that. And it was very interesting. Saka was so deep, but as a result, I think he can be your outlet, but when he's coming from that deep defensively, he's not going to be your outball, and Kane can't run. I wonder against a Spain, this is sort of something we talked about going into the Holland game, is do you need someone who can threaten the box more, because Spain's defending in the box has been poor. Against Spain, they're going to have the ball, guys. We know that. Do you need to have the runners? Do you need to have a Watkins to test them in behind? Or do you need to play a Gordon off the left or something where if Kane gets the ball, he can release a runner? Tim, is that something that when you look at this game, because I think England can win this. Let's put it this way. If you just list the names of the players, I think England have more talent than Spain. Yep. But if you look at how it works when you fit it all together, obviously with Spain, it's working really, really well. And I think trying to stop those wide players, Yamal and Nico, is going to be the focus. And it may lead to Southgate doing what I just described, which is doubling up in the defensive wide positions where someone like Saka is dropping all the way in and helping against Nico Williams. But like, does there need to be an outlet? Because I think the biggest issue for England out of possession when they've been defending in this tournament is there's no outlet, and they just can't get out, and they wind up getting absolutely crammed into the defensive third.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're playing like a box, aren't they? With almost like a 2-2-2 type thing, with kind of Rice and Mainu, and then like turning Kane, Foden, Bellingham, Saka into more of a box shape at times. And there's kind of two schools of thought, isn't there? There's kind of, well, look, Spain's midfield is going to dominate the ball, so let them, and kind of, make the calculation. They're going to dominate the ball in the middle. Let them have it in the middle, and kind of don't worry about it, but accept that and concede that territory. Or do you carry on with that kind of box and say we're going to have 4 guys in here to kind of disrupt Spain? The issue really is, to your point, I don't think Spain have been as imperious as people say they've been in this tournament. I think the France game, and I've been low on France, I think they were kind of stinky in this tournament, to be honest. But in the Spain game, I really do think it's just Spain had a couple of shots that went in, type thing. And I mean, obviously it was a lot more than that. And then they keep the ball away from you really, really well. And that's, that becomes a problem. But I don't think Spain have been this amazing machine, but what they've got, and I think you and Phil spoke about this on the Football Vision podcast, they've got that implied threat now, where it's more than implied, but where they leave Williams and Yamal. And in fact, the way Spain press is really not strange, but really effective as well, because they pull those guys in. So they really crowd up and clog up the middle, because they calculate that Yamal and Williams, if you pass the ball wide, they'll be there like A train, basically. For those of you that watch The Boys, if you don't, you probably won't get that reference. But
very, very quickly. Let's put it
yes,
that way.
yeah, very quickly. So like they stick Yamal and Williams like quite central, and then they bait you into passing it out wide, and then they go out there. I mean, I don't really think you want to be passing to Kieran Trippier anyway, to be honest, although I'm not sure he'll play. And kind of on the left side, England have treated the left side like an exclusion zone anyway. But that's the thing with Spain. This is where international football is just like so tricky, and to me, it's not about coaching. It's about like finding partnerships and combinations, because you don't really have much control over your players. If you look at the way Elliot, Spain went out of the World Cup and the Euros, right? What happened? They drew 0-0 and lost on penalties both times. What does that tell you? They're really hard to score against. Like, they didn't lose those games because they didn't give the opponent the ball, but they didn't have the cutting edge. Now, two young wingers have just fallen out of the sky for them. And it feels a bit Saka Martinelli for us, you know, like these two young wingers just kind of fall out the sky and completely transform what you can do. And now Spain can do more than the tiki-taka thing, and they can even sit back and just go, we're going to sit in our shape. And because we've got Rodri, we haven't got great defenders. That's the thing about Spain. I don't think defensively they're rock solid. They were playing two guys who play in Saudi Arabia in the semi-final, but they got Rodri, who just sits between the centre halves. And we know Rodri, right? We know he can be a third centre-back. We know he can be a central midfielder. Like, he can do everything, really. But they can sit back and just go, all right then, come on to us. And as soon as we get it, those wide guys are off, kind of thing. So that they've got a couple of different faces now, and they score from crosses, because they've got two wingers who can cross the ball. So they've got a variety of threats. So even if I think most of the time Spain are a bit vanilla, a bit 7 out of 10, nice, we keep the ball, those two wide players have just changed their world. And that is nothing the coach has done. That is nothing he has done other than, wow, I've got these two great wide players, I'm going to pick them. And that's sometimes how it goes in international football. And I'll be really, really interested to see what, if anything, Southgate changes, because he's been tweaking with regards to England's offensive threat so far. But now he's going to have to tweak. Like, now we're going to see how good that Guehi, Stones, Walker, like Walker's a brilliant defender, and he made some really good defensive plays against Netherlands. But we're really going to see how good some of those defenders are in this final.
Yeah, and I'll just pull you up on one thing you said about guys playing Saudi Arabia. Like, Jesus Navas is not going to be playing fullback for Spain in the final. It'll be Danny Carvajal again, who is obviously spectacular.
Yeah, they had two suspensions, didn't they?
Yeah.
But they're still not amazingly strong back there.
I don't think Aymeric Laporte and Robin Lenormand are the best center back pairing I've ever seen. Now, what's interesting is Cucurella. We laugh about him. Saka's had some trouble with Cucurella in the past. I don't think he's always gotten the better of him, so that'll be an interesting one to watch. I think Trippier is in real big trouble against Lamine Yamal, like real big trouble. Walker, I think, still has what it takes, especially with Saka helping on that side, to maybe keep Nico Williams somewhat quiet. The interesting thing with Spain, guys, is I don't know how injured Morata is. Do we know that news? Because he got injured by a security guard following the celebrations after their semifinal. They also won't have Pedri, which means Dani Olmo plays. He is a dangerous, dangerous guy that Rice is going to have to keep an eye on, and I don't know who their center forward will be. But like, it may be the case that with Dani Olmo in there, instead of Pedri, their midfield is a little less midfieldy. Maybe there's a chance to progress the ball more. I don't know. I think Spain are going to have a lot of the ball, and I think England are going to have to find ways to transition. And I don't know that you can transition with Trippier, Foden, Jude, Kane, and Saka playing essentially as a second right back. So one to watch. Paul, last thought on that?
Yeah, is there any way that Kane starts ahead of Watkins?
Yes.
He
will.
Hang on. Yeah, he will.
Okay.
He will. Okay. Is there any way Kane starts ahead of Watkins? Elliot, don't interrupt me there.
Wait, let me just say, no, I think he will.
Yeah.
People are going to be like, wait, did that just repeat that section? What happened?
If the names on the boxes are covered and you're just going by the profile of the player and what they're able to do at the moment in this game against Spain, given how deep England could end up sitting, how little possession they may have, based on the performance of Watkins during the Premier League season, and then what we saw in this England game and how that opened up the options, what England would need to get a goal against Spain as opposed to only sit in, and what Harry Kane gives them. Like, what's a superpower at the moment? It would be hitting runners from the outside. Well, our English runners, Bukayo, Saka, and co, are not going to be able to get on the end of those runs if they're sitting that deep, acting as wing backs. There's only one reason Harry Kane will play in this game, and it's because of his status, reputation, position within the squad, the cap. Like, if you're picking a team to go at Spain, you put Ollie Watkins out there. I don't see it any other way. The one thing he's done is maybe move the point at which he'll get substituted into a game much earlier. He might be coming on in 65 minutes if England are a turgid team hanging on by their fingernails or a goal down. So it might get him on 20 minutes earlier, and then you go to extra time, and by the time you're done, he's got to play half the minutes of the 120 minutes. So,
yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's funny, right? Because you look at the England team, like we've seen Ivan Toney hurt us with the ball just being launched to him on the halfway line and freeing Mbeumo to run in behind, right? Like, you could go with Toney, launch it to him and let him play Saka and let him play, the runners in behind. You could have Watkins run in behind himself. I think with Kane, the problem is he no longer has the hold-up play where he can stay high and receive the long ball and play in the players as well as a Toney, and he certainly doesn't have the run in behind play. So I don't know, man. We'll have to see what Southgate does. I think we know what he's going to do. He's going to pick the same team he picked against the Netherlands. And to be fair, that first half against Netherlands was some of the best football that England have played in this tournament. I hope they do it. I think for Saka and Rice, there could be a benefit. And this is tinfoil hat time. I said this before, you guys. Maybe, just maybe, if Saka is Euro winning Saka and Rice is Euro winning Rice, well, Rice, there's no issue anyway. But Saka, maybe, just maybe, those buddies from that pub in Manchester who pull on a referee shirt every Saturday and Sunday will start giving Saka some calls, because he's not the kid who missed the penalty anymore. He's the young man who helped lead England to a Euro championship. That would be something. And I think it would be something that maybe, just maybe, when the margins are as fine as they are, helps us a bit. We'll have to see. I want to talk Copa America briefly, as weird as that sounds. I want to talk Califiori. But I need to tell you quickly, because we've just got the one today, so that should make life a little easier. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp isn't just therapy online. It is just, you know what? Let's say it this way. It isn't just online therapy. It's therapy that happens to be online. You get the idea. Moral of the story is that BetterHelp is a way to access therapy. And look, do I think it's great to go into an office and go see a therapist in person in their office and have that experience? I do. I did it, and it was really impactful for me. I also recognize that for some people, the price is an obstacle. The comfort level is an obstacle. The time of the day to be able to get in a car and go and do it. When I did, I didn't have 2 kids, didn't have 2 jobs. Now I have 2 jobs and 2 kids and 2 dogs and 1 cat. Interesting. Need another cat, I guess. So moral of the story is I didn't have those things. And so it was easy for me to do. Wouldn't be so easy for me to do now. My mom, who I've mentioned a number of times, she doesn't drive anymore. Not easy for her to do. This makes therapy accessible to people who need it to be more cost-effective or more convenient or more close, or maybe a less intimidating experience. You can match with someone who meets your needs or has a specialty in the area you need. It's something you can check out, because I think when it comes to therapy, sitting and talking to someone through the things that are weighing you down helps. It helps. Exercise helps. Eating right helps. Working on your mental well-being helps. So stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/vision today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/vision today. Tim, is that enough of that?
Indeed.
Got it. Okay. So Tim, Copa America. been keeping an eye on it. Interesting tournament. Terrible refereeing, small pitches, bad pitches, all the stuff you expect from a football tournament hosted in the United States. It felt very CONMEBOL in its own way, sort of imported some CONMEBOL experiences to the U.S. Obviously, the hope is that by the time the World Cup comes around, and they have committed, I think, to making the pitches bigger and the pitches better. They certainly weren't able to do that for this tournament. But the big story, obviously, is Uruguay go out to Colombia in another feisty match. It's fair to say there were red cards, there were yellow cards, there was shithousing, and
It
at
was
the
Copa
end,
America.
yeah, it was Copa America basically. In the end, though, the Uruguay players wind up going into the stands to fight Colombia. Go into the stands to fight Colombia fans. Uruguay players go into the stands to fight Colombia fans, and very visibly is Darwin Nunez climbing over rows of seats to get to fans to start punching people. It's a bad look. It's certainly a bad look for Charlotte, the organizer, the organizing stadium and the security there. It's a bad look for the players. Now, in the interest of context here, and you always have to be careful with internet reporting because you don't know what's true. You know what you saw in the video. The interview from some of the Uruguay players and some of the news filtering out is that their families were being targeted for harassment and beers were being thrown at them, including at like babies being held by their mothers and young children. And it certainly does appear to be the case that was happening. It also does appear to be the case that they were out of harm's way by the time Darwin started climbing over rows to get to people. Now, I will admit, if my baby, if my wife, if my family was having beers thrown at them, people swinging at them, I might lose my mind and go want to get at someone. So this is all very complicated because these are 24-year-old men charged full of adrenaline where, in an environment, right, professional sports where machismo and masculinity and competitiveness is at its height and you're at a fever pitch and you're charged with adrenaline and you see someone harassing, throwing beers on your partner, on your baby. I can understand if that is in fact what happened, the inclination to react. I want to be careful because it's easy to just get on a high horse and tell people how they should behave in a situation. But I don't think if the family was out of harm's way that you can go climbing over rows of stands to go fight someone. So while I understand the instinct, I don't know that you can do it. Tim, do you have a clear-headed reaction to this? Because I find myself a little conflicted.
Yeah, I mean, I think it looks like a stadium security issue to me. The fact that there are, it does look like they're players' families, and that is roughly where you'd expect players' families to be, in like quite kind of prime seats and quite near the pitch. That is quite typical. So why were there loads of Colombia fans there? And I get it with it. Like, one of the reasons the Copa America makes sense in the US, and I think CONMEBOL really discovered this after Copa America Centenario in 2016. There's so many expat communities from South America in the US that actually the US is a really logical place to hold it, because there are communities from pretty much every CONMEBOL country around the US. So you do get like a good groundswell of expat support. So, and look, with international tournaments, the lines kind of aren't as drawn in terms of ticketing. Like, tickets come out at different times. You don't find out who you're playing until about 3 days before a game. Mixing happens more often, I think, at international tournaments. And I'm certainly aware that CONMEBOL games tend to be like, this kind of stuff tends to happen because they're so badly organized, because of security issues and all of that. But to me, it looks like a security issue. Like, if you've got an enclosure for players' families, that should not be near the kind of the fans of the opposing team. That should not happen. And I guess another reason this Copa America in the States is very useful, to your point, it's going to be a World Cup in a couple of years, and it's actually quite a good lessons learned type exercise. And I imagine that this will be a lesson that the organisers will learn pretty quickly, among other things. Like, I'm aware that a lot of attendances have been very low. It's not been very well advertised and things like that. But I really think, I suspect once the World Cup rolls around, you will not be able to get anywhere near players' families in the stadium. At least I hope so, because I also don't think that happens for no reason.
Yeah. So I want to say a couple of things. This is not me caping for security firms or the stadium organizers or anything like that. In the US, there is no segregation of home and away fans. That's not a thing. And by and large, 99.99% of the time, there is no aggro between home and away fans because there's so many transplants in the US and there's so much movement between states, and not just between states, teams move between states. Like just ask Stan Kroenke, his St. Louis Rams aren't in St. Louis anymore, are they? So stadium organizers in the US are just not familiar with, and I don't want to defend them for being idiots, just so we're clear though, segregating home and away. That's not a thing that's typically done. It is also very common for players' families to just sit among the fans in U.S. sporting events, and in some instances, in proximity to the opposition fans. And sometimes they get a light ribbing, but there really is not a lot of problems. And in fact, there's very rarely sort of any major fighting or disruption in U.S. sports because, first of all, just the passion levels are very different. It's one of the things that I think attracts us to football is it's so passionate, so tribal. And there just isn't that home and away rivalry. So I think this is ignorance on the part of the organizers in understanding the difference in this sport, the difference in this sport in South America. We see these scenes in South American sport. And by the way, I don't want to just restrict it to South America. We see it in other sport all over the world, but the intensity of the passion for the sport, the animosity between the teams in this moment, I think it is terrible organizationally and terrible security. I just want to be clear that I think the reason may be simply not a familiarity with the difference here. And hopefully this will be educational for the World Cup, as I expect it will be. So just a little of my opinion on that in terms of learning lessons from a major security failure. Again, this is a major security failure.
Also, I was just going to say as well, I appreciate, like, if I looked into, I mean, I don't know, but if any one of us looked into what some of the stewards and security staff are paid at these events as well, it's probably not, I'm going to be a hero money, if you know what I mean. And I think that's probably understandable.
Yeah, totally understandable. I just think that, like I said, the appreciation for what could happen determines a lot of how these things are staffed, right? Understanding what could happen. And I think this showed a lack of understanding of what could happen. You can't get two South American teams together in a major semifinal and have their fans sitting in proximity to the families of the opposition team. It's just all around terrible. But for people who don't understand why were they sitting there, why wasn't there segregation, stuff like that, that's not a commonplace thing to happen in sport in America. But that's not an excuse for not knowing to do it, obviously. Paul, let's set that aside, though, the obvious security lapse. I think there's a big question now of whether Darwin will face a ban, and potentially a lengthy ban. People have referenced Cantona, going after Fan. I would say it like this. I think it depends on the extent to which the people considering the ban are willing to appreciate the emotion of the families being at risk and determine whether the families were still at risk at the time he went into the stands or whether he was looking for retribution and the extent to which they understand him doing that. I don't want to repeat myself by saying that I find myself conflicted, so I'll just ask you, what do you think Darwin could be facing?
Yeah, I don't know. It depends on the politics of it all, because at the end of the day, this was all about organization. The problem was in the setup, right? There's actually no real surprises here. If you play this game 1,000 times, a whole bunch of times, some shit's going to go bad with how it was set up, how it was organized, how it was structured, where the fans were, where the families were. And like whether it was Darwin Nunez or some other player who's like in every team, there's a few players whose blood will run hot. There's almost a level of inevitability here. So maybe he'll get slammed for it. Maybe they'll come down hard on him. Maybe they have to set an example, because you can't have players going into the crowd and going after the crowd and all that kind of stuff. But actually, it's all on the setup. A young guy, and you had mentioned, like, once he realized his family was safe or whatever, then is it rational or at least excuse? Look, when you're gone, you're gone. When the red mist descends, it's gone. And when it's gone, you ain't getting it back. At least, how many times do you see players have to been dragged away from a referee by like 7 of their teammates, and they're walking away and then they spin around and they're back again? Like, when the mist has descended, it has descended. And this setup that they had in the stadium, as reported. Like, that's where the bug was in the software. So I think they should let him off as lightly as possible, but politics may dictate that you can't be letting players off for doing an Eric Cantona and kung fu kick in the crowd and all that kind of shit. But I totally get that there will be very decent players, good guys who lose their minds in situations like that and get themselves in a tangle, but it's all on the setup.
Might be on mute, Elliot.
Good one.
Best
Good
day
one.
ever in my life.
Not only on
This is a
mute, but
national
looking at
holiday.
another screen at that time, so unable to get back off of mute, which is a really, really strong move for me.
Been there. We have a self-help group on a Wednesday that meets, Elliot, to talk about these kinds of challenges. Yeah, I've had the on the wrong screen, been told it's on mute, scrambling to find my way there.
See at the
Very
meeting.
little understanding out there, though. That's what I think, Elliot.
Well, okay. So I don't want to be too cynical, but I do think that organizers are not going to admit they screwed up. You know what I mean?
Scapegoat time. Yep.
They're not going to be like, hey, it's not Darwin's fault for going after the fans. It's our fault for security organization. So they're not going to just take the black eye. They're not just going to accept it, and even if they should.
If it's not him, it's them, and the less him it is, the more them it is.
Bingo. Now, having said that, that's what CONMEBOL might say, right, as the organizers. But CONMEBOL doesn't determine, and can anyone correct me if I'm wrong? I don't think there's any one central body that gets to determine if he's banned. Does FIFA get to? Like, if FIFA bans him, can he play for Liverpool? Or does each individual body have to...
It will be a CONMEBOL. It's a CONMEBOL competition, so it'd be CONMEBOL and it'd be suspended for playing for Uruguay.
Right, but theoretically, the Premier League could then step in also and say, based on the scenes we've seen of Darwin Núñez, we're banning him from competition.
I'm not sure they can. I can't think of a precedent for that where someone's been banned for club football for something they've done in an international game. I don't recall.
What about Suarez biting?
Yeah, no, he wasn't banned in the Premier League for that. There was a separate biting incident in the Premier League.
Right, that's
there
right.
There were two separate ones.
Christ almighty, that's right.
He did it twice, yeah.
Unbelievable. He tasted so good. Once you get the taste of human flesh, you're supposed to get rid of it. I mean, that's a good question, actually. Can they legally ban him? Can they legally? I'm sure there must be a precedent where in these contracts,
I think it's kind of unlikely, and I really don't think it would happen for something like this, where I wouldn't be surprised if he got let off with a fine or something, just because if you do give him a big ban, it does potentially like reopen the discussion and bring a bit of like one way to kind of sweep it under the carpet is just to go, here's a fine, don't do it again, and we'll all move on.
I think the problem here is that Elliot's looking at it with his legal brain, right? And he's thinking class action suit, right? Is that where we're going here, Elliot?
Well, I think, I mean, first of all, obviously the fans will probably sue and there might be some arrests. I'm sure there have been already, I would imagine. But like, yeah, I just wonder, if you do something that's beyond the pale in a competition that doesn't impact that organizing body, can that organizing body say, because of the thing you did over there, we're going to ban you over here, right? I don't know, because I know labor laws are so interesting in different places. You may not even have the authority to ban them for something they did somewhere else. So all very interesting. Not a good look, though, and certainly for a country that's going to be hosting the World Cup, a very big wake-up call to get its act together. This has been a terribly run tournament. Now, I think CONMEBOL has to take some responsibility for that, but the pitches have been bad. The attendance has not been good. The behavior has not been good. And that's something that has to get sorted out before the World Cup. So let's finish with transfer stuff for #clicks. Paul, let me ask you a science question. Can you inch closer forever Or do you eventually touch? Is it one of those things where it's like if you get halfway closer to something every time, you will never actually get there? Or can you inch close enough to touch? I bring this up because we continue to inch closer to Califiori.
I think it's called edging, and yes, you can.
I mean, you said it, not me. Please carry on. I'm enjoying this tremendously.
You really want me to carry on?
No.
Yeah, look, especially when the guy's at a tournament, like now he's just wrapped up from the tournament, he's heading back, so things, but there's always this delay. We've seen it quite a lot with Arsenal, I think, in recent seasons, where it's just kind of it's done, but they're taking a week, they're taking 2 weeks, they're getting organized on their sides. Part of the problem is we know too much before the thing gets done. There's pretty good visibility on these things in a way that there wasn't a decade ago when it was all rumors and surprises and most rumors were wrong. And there's a whole bunch of bad rumors, but there's class A rumors and then there's class D rumors. There's not much in between. It's pretty easy to tell that the Califiori thing is very, 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 very likely to happen. And so everybody kind of reacts. It's maybe over-reported compared to the old days. So you don't have this sudden late surge of, this thing's actually happening among the morass of rumors. There just never seems the urgency on any side now to wrap things up. The clubs are in agreement, and then it's agreed, but they have to work out the details. And it seems like a very civil business these days where there isn't this, people hopping in a taxi to go across London to sign with the other guys kind of thing. That just doesn't have that vibe to it in the same old way it does that it might have in the old days. And so it just seems very organized, a procession, people following the path. This seems to be on a path and will take time. And when it's done, even then, we'll be waiting a week, maybe 2 weeks for an announcement video. Basically, he's going to have his vacation. And when he comes off vacation, we'll want him on whatever part of the tour is left and shortly before that. And then they'll get into, well, do we want to announce it just before he joins the tour so that he can be part of that? So I think there are timelines that are not our timelines, that never satisfy our quench to edge closer to the signing.
Tim, you have thoughts on Califiori?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of sounds a little bit like the reporting in Italy is a bit more certain. Like, there seems to be a consensus that this is definitely a target for Arsenal. Arsenal want this to happen. But in Italy, it's very much like this is basically done, whereas I think in England, it's a bit more circumspect. And that's actually not that unusual. I had this experience on the women's side this summer when there was a story about Arsenal women being interested in Kira Walsh, and a lot of it on the Spanish side was like, this is nearly done. And actually, when I checked it was like, no, that's not the case, kind of thing. So, and then other English-based reporters kind of got the same conclusion that I did. So I don't think that's that unusual. And I think particularly in Italy, when Juventus are involved in something somehow, I think the level of reporting around Juventus is higher than pretty much any other club, probably. So if Juventus are in the race for something, I think there's a lot of journalists who go digging for it. So, I mean, it very much looks like we're interested. But what I was interested in on the English side, I think it was David Ornstein, who is someone I would trust the most, quite frankly, was talking about how Arteta really wants the player, but potentially there are people in the Arsenal hierarchy who are to be convinced that this represents value given the number of players, which I kind of read as, you've definitely got to sell at least one of Kivior or Zinchenko, and maybe even both of them to do this. So it really looks like this is an absolutely rock solid target. I still don't think, based on what David Ornstein said, I'm at this is definitely happening phase. But then maybe, because also with David, he tends to report stuff when it's he didn't get this first, basically, right? And I don't believe it's because he knew nothing about it. I think the way he likely works is he prefers to report things that are quite far down the line. I'm sure he knows every single player on Edu's spreadsheet somehow. But I think I suspect the way he works is like, when it looks like it might happen, that's when I'll drop the Orn bomb type thing. Whereas, in Italy it's been reported, and so now he's got his information, and it's still a bit like, there are still some guys at Arsenal who are to be convinced this is a good spend. And I guess the TLDR here is I trust David's reporting an awful lot, and so I think I'm about maybe 85 to 90% think this is going to happen, but I perhaps think we're maybe not there yet.
Yeah, I will say this about the player. He's fantastic. He's just fantastic and so handsome.
Where do you think he'll play?
I think he is a left center back. I think he is a brilliant left center back, and I think he's a left center back in the mold of William Saliba. He has that Rolls Royce quality, handles situations before they become a problem. Maybe not the burst of pace that Saliba has, but certainly the ability to read the game, intercept. He can carry the ball in the attacking half. Just look at him score that goal against Juventus, where he recovers it, goes into the box, chips the keeper. I think for us, left center, left back, inverted left back certainly works. Certainly. So I think he is a Gabriel rotational option, and I think he is a starting left back option. I think he's ready to start for us right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, that is the place in the squad where in the team where there's the gap, right? Like, we kind of played Kivior, Tomiyasu, maybe it doesn't feel like we've got a nailed down left back. And I think the other interesting thing about him, when I was kind of doing a bit of research about Italy before the tournament, is how much he brings the ball out. And actually, Italy often play a back three, and one of the reasons they do it is because he steps into midfield a lot. And I think on our left side, where you've now got Declan Rice there, and probably that means no more Zinchenko. And, you've talked about this, Elliot. You can't just lose Zinchenko and dispose of him because, well, you can, but then you've got to replace that kind of distribution quality, that guy who can kind of step in. And it seems to me that if we're settling, well, of course we've settled on the fact that Declan Rice is going to be on the left side of our midfield and Martinelli's over there. Like, we don't have a distributor over there. Gabriel is also the weaker of the two centre-backs at that. So essentially what I'm saying is Arsenal kind of need a distributor on the left side, and to me, left-back feels like where the gap is.
Paul, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, and I think is the appeal for me at Califiori. Like, I love Gabriel. I don't think that's where we need to spend money and to upgrade. Califiori dropping into midfield, being a lefty. We're a little light on lefties in the centre of the park on the left-hand side these days. That's why the Mikel Merino thing, like, I can see why that would be something we might look at. If we're going to use Rice as the left eight, very much a righty, still very much learning the patterns of the game on that side of the pitch. So yeah, I can see Calafiori aiding distribution, providing us the cover, giving us options, flexibility. I mean, a super exciting player. Would absolutely love him in the mix. Don't want him coming for Gabriel's spot. It's interesting that the two strong. The reporting on Gabriel Jesus and Zinchenko potentially being players that Arsenal were looking to look for options for this summer. That just keeps coming back to me. I gotta think there was fire with that smoke, and that both those players, it'll be interesting to watch them over the summer. Even though I see value in both of them, I think they're super talented players. I think Gabriel Jesus, at his best and fit, is a force to be reckoned with. But we just haven't got enough out of that so far. And it seems like players have come or are coming to take their places. And we can't keep all the players, and PSR is a thing, and moves need to be made. So It could be one of the most interesting summers for outgoings compared to. We've always needed to do this in recent years. We've done it very, very poorly. We better have deconstipated ourselves in terms of our ability to move players in both directions. It's going to be a very challenging summer for Edu on the moving the pieces out and in.
I don't think people have fully appreciated how hard it's going to be to find the players that make us better. And I want to be clear about this. Buying mediocre players to provide depth doesn't make you better. So we have to find excellent players who are willing to go battle for a place in the squad. Like the Cedrics of the world, those moves don't work. We've learned that the hard way. The Pablo Maries of this world, like buying players who are just a squad number, who can sit on the bench, but you don't want to use them, doesn't make you better. The reason that Califiori is such an exciting signing to me is Califiori is going to go take someone's spot. And if he doesn't, he's certainly going to be close to doing it. And that's how you get better, like Trossard did, right? Like Jorginho.
Can I say something, Elliot? Mm-hmm. I think I said this when it came up before. I think we just got to stop thinking about the Cedrics. Those were not the signings that were in the frame for it. Kivior is the analogy. Vieira is the analogy.
Sambi.
Mm-hmm. The younger players.
I agree with you.
And Zinchenko, and maybe I don't think you would but maybe Zinchenko was the wrong. Maybe we have outgrown Zinchenko, the Zinchenko type move from a year or two ago, not the Cedric type move from 3 or 4, or the Pablo. That's not on the cards. But Zinchenko or Kivior or Vieira, those may be the moves we've outgrown.
Yeah, and I also think, especially in certain parts of the pitch, right? Like if you look at midfield's a really hard place to play someone who's not at the level. A good example of that is Manchester City. They bought Calvin Phillips. Calvin Phillips wasn't at the level. Did he play a little? Did he play occasionally? He didn't play at all. Matheus Nunes didn't play at all. I think when you're trying to hit 91, 92 points, if you're not good enough, you don't play a little, you don't play at all. And so finding players for us who are good enough to play at all is going to be hard because we're a 90-point team. And that's really, really hard to get past. So I think we're in a really tough spot. You look at Manchester United buying, Højlund last summer, Xerxes this summer. They're nice players. It's not that they're bad. They're not going to win a Premier League with Højlund and Xerxes, maybe in 5 years. Not today. I don't think they're going to get top 4 with Højlund and Xerxes. And so, it's all well and good being like, oh, well, we bought this player who was a good value and pretty decent, but you're not trying to be decent. You're trying to be at 92, 93, 94 points. That's really hard. And so I think we're in a really tough place. But Califiori, at least to me, is a player who is good enough that he is not going to be content to sit and watch. He's going to make someone uncomfortable, as is Timber, as is Tomiyasu, who's a good player. And I love that mindset. I think Trossard did that to an extent. If we go get a Kimmich, if we go get an Eze, those are players who are not going to make anyone comfortable with their squad place. Whereas if you go get a Mikel Merino, for example, Mikel Merino's not good enough for Arsenal. People say, but we need some depth there. We need some depth there. Again, it's the Calvin Phillips point. Do you just want a player who's really not at your level and you're buying him to make up the numbers? Because usually those guys wind up not contributing. We'll see. We'll see what happens. If you want to be excited about Califiori, check out the scouting video. I don't say this lightly. The guy was incredibly impressive, and you've watched him play for Italy, and maybe you've seen him play for Bologna a bit. But I think there's
Elliot. How often have you come away from a scouting video and said the guy was incredible?
Not often. I would say that I am criticized, if anything, for watching scouting videos and maybe having too critical an eye and looking for their flaws.
When was the last one? When was the last time you came away from that and said, that guy's incredible? I don't think I remember you doing it.
Odegaard, maybe? I was really impressed with Odegaard. I'm trying to think who else that we've done a scouting video on where I really liked Eze, by the way, who we just did recently. I was very, very impressed with what I saw there. Kai Havertz, I was really high on. I just wasn't sure he was a midfielder, but I loved what I saw in the scouting video.
Yeah, but you were more equivocal, I think, in both cases, in
Yeah, I
Odegaard
can't really
and in...
equivocate here on this guy. The only thing I'll say is there was one little clip in the scouting video where he played on the right side and he didn't look comfortable there at all. But outside of that, it was real good.
Another tick in his box is that he's one of the many players who's kind of been slated by Mourinho. There was a game because, like, obviously he had a bad injury, didn't he, Califiori? So he's coming through a little bit later than maybe he would have.
At 16, total knee reconstruction.
Yeah. Otherwise, he
PCL,
might have been.
MCL, yeah.
He might have been on the radar at 18, 19 without that. But Roma played a game against, I think, Inter a couple of years ago when Mourinho was manager, and obviously Inter won. And Mourinho rolled out his usual excuse, and he was like, "Oh, Inter had, reeled off their substitutes," and he said, "And I had," and he reeled off the names of 3 substitutes, and one of them was Califiori. So, given some of the guys that Jose Mourinho hasn't liked as young players, that's probably a big tick in the box for him as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like he would definitely have come through earlier, I think, if he hadn't suffered that injury, and it was a nasty challenge that nearly ended his career. So, and he likely will have trouble like walking when he's in his 40s because of it, but he can play football right now, which is a beautiful
That's a
thing.
him problem. Am I right?
Nailed it. Last thing, Paul. We're starting to hear some news of departures like Eddie Nketiah. There's some interest from Marseille, interestingly. Reece Nelson, I think West Ham. We know Sambi, it looks like he's moving, and I think we're getting a really good deal potentially for Nuno Tavares. Like it's a loan, but a loan with a compulsory option at about 7 or 8 million euros is what it's been mooted in, and there's a sell-on fee. I think that's pretty good, honestly. The thing that I think fans sometimes do, right, is they're like, why won't other clubs just buy the players we don't want for more than they're worth? Why won't they do that? And then they point to a transfer where that happened somewhere else. And like, it's nice when that happens, sure. What you really want, probably ideally, is a transfer where you get a good fee for a player and the buying team gets good value for what they bought, right? Like Sturm Graz paid their record fee for Beereth. And like, I think it's a good fee for us. Granit Xhaka is a great example. At his age, at his stage of his contract, where he was, I think we did very well to get the fee we got. He turned out to be a brilliant buy for Bayer Leverkusen. Everybody wins in that respect. Now, I know you might say, well, we should have kept him, but hey, we had a pretty good season too. So I don't know. I mean, Reece, Eddie, Tavares, Sambi, it looks like some clear out is happening. And I think that's a critical component of us bringing players in as well. So how do you feel about any of the outgoing rumors?
Well, Eddie's got to get sold into the Premier League if we want to get the money that's certain.
Marseille are talking 25 million potentially. I think that's euros, but that's not, I mean, some people would say that's not enough, but I don't think that's a bad offer.
Yeah, I mean, I nailed my colors to the flag, Elliot, in the Eddie Wars, where I said he's easily 20 to 30 million because he's a young English striker. He's not that young anymore. With the English pedigree, with the records, and English fans will be super excited about getting him at their club. Okay, it won't be Liverpool, it won't be City, but they wouldn't be buying from us anyway. So that's where I think he needs to be sold to get the money. I will be delighted if Marseille are correct in thinking they should be paying something like 25 million euros for him. I've really nailed my colours to the flag on this. This is not a 10 or 15 million pound player. That's not what this transfer will be. I'm on record, Elliot. This guy is going to be in the mid 20s, maybe a little higher, certainly very close to that. So we'll see where it goes with Marseille, but like we got to have an English club chasing him to keep the values up there, even if he ends up going to Marseille because they decide he's worth it. Tavares, like Califiori really reminds me of Tavares, but like really, really good and rounded game. That kind of ability to take off into midfield and run through the opposition, which like was Tavares' superpower. What happened at the end of it, God knows. But man, did he kind of veer into midfield up against their back line and have them in conniptions. That was the thing he really did. But a much, much rougher, less polished version of it. So it'd be great if we get some decent money for him. He's definitely an option for people. Reece, we can only wish him the best there. I don't know how that plays out for him and where it ends up. But he's obviously a quality footballer at a certain level. And yeah, we need our English lads are where we've made our money, our coin. Willock, we could have got 20 plus for Maitland-Niles had we pulled the trigger at the time. So I'm still keeping him in there. That's on us, not on him. Iwobi, Oxlade-Chamberlain. Okay, I'm going back a bit, but there's kind of a pattern that if other English clubs want those guys, we've got proper money for those guys. Surprised ourselves a little at time. So, there could be some decent money coming from Reece Nelson and Eddie in the English leagues, and we'll see where that goes.
Mm. All right. Well, I think we can leave it there, Tim, unless you have deep insights into our sales that you want to share.
Not really. Other than Marseille, also, I mean, appallingly, Marseille seem to be offering a lot of money for Mason Greenwood.
The mayor of Marseille had some thoughts on that weren't too positive, so we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, but it does make me wonder where they're kind of getting their money from, if they can do both of those. But if they can do Eddie, great. But I think Reece Nelson to West Ham is like is a real rumor, and I think with some of these guys, some competition in the market might be quite good, like playing some teams off against each other if we can do that. But I'm reasonably positive we'll see some decent sales this summer. I do think that the HLN boys, I think they're all going to get sold, and like for reasonable price, not like 50 million and all of that, but like reasonable prices. I'm reasonably positive about that.
Yeah. All right. I think that's enough for a Thursday pod when there's not a ton going on other than football coming home. By the way, I don't know. I can't remember which nation did it. Was it Spain or they interviewed some players from one of the nations, and maybe it was the Dutch, and they're like, "Do you know what they mean when the English say it's coming home?" And the Dutch players like, "Have they won anything? Why, when's it coming home? Why is it home?" They're like taking the piss big time. Well, now they're out of the tournament. So what goes around comes around. It's all karma. So Tim's next history pod will post tomorrow. We're going to do some more scouting pods next week, and hopefully Arsenal will now jump to action in the transfer market. I think with teams falling out of the Euros, that could happen. If we are looking at any English or Spanish players, though, we may have a few more days to wait before the news on that starts to break. So good luck to everybody rooting on England. And obviously, if you're rooting on Spain, good luck to you. I'll be pulling for England so Saka and Rice can come back as heroes and maybe propel them to win additional trophies this season. We'll see. Paul's on Twitter. Pause my pants. Thanks, Pause.
Woohoo!
Tim's on Twitter. Stominator. Thanks, Tim.
My pleasure as always.
My name's Elliot Smith. Block me on Twitter. Gunner, we love you, and we'll talk to you after Arsenal 10. Transfer window.